Life's greatest and most valuable lessons are often hidden deep within its darkest and most difficult moments. Watch, learn, and evolve along with us as we explore the resilience of the human spirit. Hit subscribe to stay updated on every new lesson.
She's not the one for you. You know that, don't you? I heard my father's voice before I saw anything. I had gone looking for my fiancé at my cousin's housewarming, tired of waiting by the appetizer table alone while the party swirled around me. The hallway leading to the back study was dim, and the door was cracked, just enough that I could see a slice of the room. My father's broad shoulders, his silver hair, and across from him, the man I had planned to spend my life with. Daniel didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. "Claire is wonderful," my father continued, and I almost laughed at how he used my name like I was a stranger he felt sorry for. "But your future is in Seattle. You're about to make partner. The firm up there, the network, the life you're building. Claire doesn't fit that picture. She never will. Mr. Holt, my younger daughter, on the other hand." My father let that sentence float. "Rachel has been in Seattle for 2 years. She already knows the players in that world. She's been asking about you, you know. Has been for a long time." I stood in that hallway with my hand pressed flat against the wall, not breathing. "I think you already know what the right move is," my father said. "I'm not asking you to be cruel to Claire, just honest. She'll land on her feet. She always does. Small, quiet, manageable. That's her whole personality." I backed away before I heard Daniel's response. I already knew what it would be. A man who doesn't defend you after 3 years when your own father calls you small and manageable is a man who has been thinking the same thing himself. I smiled through the rest of that party. I clinked glasses and said the right things and drove home alone, and it wasn't until I was sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning that I finally let myself feel it. Not the betrayal, not yet. Just the particular loneliness of understanding all at once that the 2 people who were supposed to be in your corner had been colluding behind your back for God knows how long. I didn't confront either of them that night. I made the same mistake I always made, which was waiting, watching, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Over the next 6 weeks, Daniel became someone I barely recognized. Suddenly Seattle came up in every conversation. The opportunity, the timing, the career trajectory. My sister's name appeared with suspicious regularity. "Rachel mentioned this, Rachel recommended that." He visited her once for a long weekend and came back different in a way I couldn't name but could absolutely feel. He stopped reaching for my hand in public. He started sleeping on the edge of the bed like he was already halfway out the door. My best friend noticed before I admitted it. "He looks at his phone differently," she told me over coffee. "Like, he's waiting for something." I told her I was probably overthinking it. I said that a lot in those weeks. The end came on a Sunday. Daniel sat across from me at our kitchen table with the careful expression of a man who had rehearsed this, and told me that he had accepted the partnership offer in Seattle, and that he thought it was best if he went alone. He said he cared about me. He said I deserved someone who could give me what I needed. He said all the things people say when they have already decided and just need you to stop asking questions. I asked only one: "Is my sister part of this decision?" He looked at the table. That was his answer. 3 months later, they were engaged. My father called to tell me personally, which I thought was either deeply misguided or deliberately cruel. He said he hoped I understood. He said the heart wants what it wants. He said Rachel had always admired Daniel from afar and that sometimes families get complicated, and he hoped I would find it in me to be happy for them. I hung up before he finished the sentence. I spent 1 week in my apartment doing nothing productive. 7 days of takeout containers and unwatched television, and the specific hollow exhaustion that comes from having your family treat you like a problem they solved. Then, on the 8th morning, I woke up and something in me had shifted overnight. Not healed, not even close, but hardened into something I could work with. I called my landlord. I gave my notice. I had a friend from grad school, Priya, who had been trying to get me to move to Denver for 2 years. She worked in product development at a mid-sized tech company and had mentioned more than once that her team was understaffed and her boss was difficult, and she needed someone who understood systems. I had a background in operations and process management. It wasn't a perfect fit on paper, but nothing about my life was fitting neatly on paper anymore. I texted her at 6 in the morning. "Is that job still open?" She called me back in 4 minutes. I left Portland on a Tuesday in November, with my car packed tighter than I thought physics allowed, and a savings account that would last me 4 months if I was careful and 2 months if I wasn't. I didn't write a goodbye note to my father. I didn't call Rachel. I sent Daniel exactly one message, not angry, not long, just 3 words. Watch me now. I don't know if he read it. I didn't wait to find out. Denver greeted me with gray skies and a wind that came off the mountains like it had somewhere to be. Priya had found me a sublet, a 1-bedroom with a radiator that clanged all night and the bathroom tile that was cracked along one entire wall. I stood in the middle of that small space with my first box in my arms and thought, this is the beginning. It didn't feel like the beginning of anything good yet, but I had learned enough to know that the feeling comes later. The job was everything Priya had warned me about. The company, a logistics software firm called Pathline, operated with the organized chaos of a place that had grown faster than its internal systems. My official title was Operations Coordinator, which in practice meant I was the person who figured out why nothing was working and then built the thing that made it work. The hours were long. My manager, a man named Greg, who communicated primarily through abrupt emails and skeptical silences, made it clear in the first week that he had not requested someone new and did not particularly want one. I stayed late anyway. Not to impress anyone. There was no one watching at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, but because the problems were interesting and I had always worked best when I had something to solve. The breakthrough with Greg came unexpectedly, the way most real things do. We were the last 2 people in the office on a Thursday night, both staring at a client onboarding process that had been failing in the same place for 6 months, and I pulled up a mapping tool and started diagramming the breakdown in real time. He watched without speaking for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Nobody's done it visually before." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it was the beginning of being seen. I met Marcus 3 months into my time at Pathline. He came in as a consultant brought on to evaluate whether the company's client support infrastructure was scalable. I was asked to give him access to the operational data and walk him through our current workflow. I expected someone senior and dismissive, the kind of consultant who arrives already knowing what they're going to recommend. What I got instead was a man who sat across from me in a conference room and actually listened. He asked follow-up questions. He wrote things down. When I explained a workaround I had built for a recurring data handoff problem, he stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Wait, how did you figure that out?" "Trial and error," I said. "How long did it take?" 2 evenings. He looked at me differently after that, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, in the way that people look at you when they are genuinely recalibrating their understanding of something. We worked together for 6 weeks before anything personal crossed the professional line. Lunches in the building cafeteria became a habit we fell into without discussing it. We talked about work, then about cities we had lived in, then about the kind of slow, honest conversation that only happens when 2 people have both had the experience of building something from nothing and failing at it at least once. He had started a consulting firm in his late 20s, run it for 3 years, and then watched it fold during a client funding crisis that had nothing to do with his work. "The hardest part wasn't the money," he said once, over terrible cafeteria sandwiches. "It was accepting that I had built something real and it still wasn't enough to survive circumstances I couldn't control." I told him about my father. Not everything, not that first time, just enough. That I had left Portland because staying felt like agreeing with a story about myself that wasn't true. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I know exactly what that feels like." There is a particular intimacy in being understood by someone who is not trying to fix you. Marcus never tried to fix anything about me. He took what I offered and treated it with care, and that was so different from what I had known that I almost didn't recognize it at first. When his consulting contract ended, he asked me to dinner at a real restaurant, not the cafeteria, not takeout at a desk, a place with cloth napkins, where he had made a reservation. We dated for a year before he asked me to be part of something larger. By that point, I had been promoted twice at Pathline and had quietly rebuilt the entire client onboarding infrastructure from scratch. Greg, who had once treated me like an inconvenience, now brought me into every senior meeting and introduced me as the person who had cut client dropout rates by 40%. I had found, slowly and without planning it, that I was actually very good at the thing I did, not just competent. Genuinely talented in the way that only becomes clear when you are no longer working inside someone else's shadow. Marcus had spent the same year building towards something. He had been developing a methodology, a consulting framework specifically for mid-market logistics companies that were scaling faster than their operations could handle, and he had enough client interest to launch a standalone firm. He wanted a partner, not an assistant, not a support staff, a co-founder with equal equity who would run the operational side of the business the way he couldn't. He slid a folder across the table one evening in my apartment. I opened it and read through the business outline while he watched me with the particular patience of someone who had learned when to stay quiet. "This is serious," I said. "It's the most serious thing I've ever put together," he said. "I wouldn't show it to you if I didn't mean it." I looked at the equity split. 50-50. No asterisks. "What if we fail?" I asked. "Then we fail building something we actually believe in," he said. "But I don't think we will." We didn't. The first year was exactly as difficult as building anything real tends to be. We worked out of Marcus's spare bedroom for 5 months while we landed anchor clients. I handled everything operational: contracts, workflows, team structures, client deliverables. He handled business development and strategy. We argued about money, about risk tolerance, about how fast to grow. We learned each other's edges and worked around them. Those arguments, every one of them, made the company better. Our first major client was a regional freight company that had been hemorrhaging money on an outdated routing system. We rebuilt their logistics framework over 4 months. They referred us to 2 other companies before we had even finished the project. By the end of year 2, we had a team of 7 and an office in Denver's River North neighborhood, small but real, with our name on the door. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday evening. Not at a restaurant, not with any staging. We were sitting on the floor of the new office after everyone else had left, surrounded by onboarding materials for a new client, both of us eating leftover Thai food out of containers. He set down his chopsticks, looked at me, and said, "I want to do this with you for the rest of my life. All of it." No ring in that moment. He said he wanted me to pick it out. That he had no interest in guessing what I would want when I was the one who would wear it. We got married 6 months later. A small ceremony at a venue in the foothills outside Denver. 40 people, wildflowers on every table. Priya was my maid of honor. Marcus's brother gave a toast that made half the room cry. I wore a dress I had found at a small boutique that I still think about sometimes as the most purely right choice I have ever made. My father was not invited. Neither was Rachel. I had spoken to my father once in the years since I left Portland. A brief, factual conversation in which he told me he hoped I wasn't still upset. And I told him I wasn't upset at all, which was true. What I was, by that point, was done. Those are very different things. 4 years into our marriage and 5 years into the firm, Harmon Consulting had grown into something neither of us had fully imagined at the beginning. 16 full-time employees, clients in 6 states, a second office in Salt Lake City that we had opened the previous spring. Marcus had been invited to speak at 2 national logistics conferences. I had been asked to join the board of a Denver business accelerator that supported women-owned operations companies, a role that I took seriously and found genuinely meaningful. We had found our rhythm. His vision and relationship building matched against my systems and execution, each of us making the other better without either of us disappearing into the partnership. We talked about starting a family in ways that were becoming more concrete, less hypothetical. Life felt, in the most grounded and unglamorous way, like exactly what it was supposed to be. I had not thought about Portland in a long time. Then Marcus came home one evening and set a business news brief on the kitchen counter. He had circled a small item near the bottom of the page. "I saw this and thought you should see it before I mentioned it in any other context," he said. "I didn't want you to hear it secondhand." The item read, "Holton Webb Consulting, formerly a prominent Portland-based management consultancy, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection following the loss of 3 major contracts and an unsuccessful national expansion effort." My father had started that firm 20 years ago. Daniel had made partner there 18 months after relocating to Seattle. And then, apparently, the Seattle office had been the first to fold. My sister, who had joined as a client liaison when she moved back to Portland after marrying Daniel, had been listed in earlier coverage as a senior account manager on 2 of the 3 lost contracts. I read the item twice. I set it down. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. There was no satisfaction in it, less than I might have expected actually. just the strange, quiet recognition of a story completing itself. I would have left it there. Closed the chapter, moved on. What I did not anticipate was the phone call from the industry consortium. The Western Logistics and Operations Summit was the premier annual event in our field. 3 days in Denver, 500 attendees, keynote speakers who shaped how the industry thought about itself. I had attended 3 times as a participant. This year, the program director called me personally to ask if Harman Consulting would consider being a featured sponsor, and if I would be willing to deliver one of the main stage keynotes. I said yes to both. The guest list, which I reviewed a week before the event, contained a name that stopped me mid-scroll. Daniel Webb. He was listed as a representative of a mid-tier logistics firm in Portland, apparently his new position after the collapse of Holt & Webb. Beside his name, a +1, Rachel Holt Webb. My father had also registered. He was listed simply as a private attendee. I sat with this information for a long evening. I called Priya, who lived in Denver now and who knew everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I have always trusted her. "What do you want to do?" she asked, when I finished. I said slowly, "that I want to go give the best keynote anyone in that room has ever heard. And I want to do it knowing they're in the audience. That's it. That's it." Marcus's response when I told him that night was simpler still. He took my hand across the kitchen table. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do, and I'm going to be in the front row." The summit was held at the Denver Convention Center, and Harman Consulting's sponsorship meant our name was on signage throughout the main hall. I arrived with Marcus the morning of the keynote wearing a charcoal blazer I had bought specifically for the occasion, not because I needed armor, but because the right clothes are a form of clarity. I saw my father first. He was standing near the registration desk, looking slightly out of place in a room where he no longer held any particular position. He was older than I remembered. He noticed me at almost the same moment I noticed him, and for a beat neither of us moved. Then his expression shifted, a recalibration, a surprise he was trying to absorb without showing. I nodded once. Professional, even. Then I kept walking. Marcus squeezed my hand. I spotted Rachel and Daniel during the pre-keynote reception. They were standing at the edge of the networking area with drinks in hand, and I watched from across the room for a moment before they saw me. My sister looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. Daniel was scanning the room with the careful expression of someone trying to locate people who might be useful. They found me standing with Marcus and the program director, mid-conversation about the afternoon's breakout sessions. I watched Rachel see me. I watched her process the lanyard around my neck, which identified me as a featured keynote speaker. I watched her look at the Harman Consulting signage on the banner behind the registration table. I watched her look at Marcus, who was mid-sentence about our Salt Lake City expansion, completely at ease, clearly someone who belonged entirely in this room. "Claire," she said. The word came out smaller than she intended. "Rachel." I smiled, genuinely. Not warmly, just cleanly. "I'm glad you could make it." Daniel extended a hand to Marcus with the automatic professionalism of someone who had spent years learning how to be smooth in rooms like this. "Daniel Webb. I'm with Pacific Northwest Logistics. Big fan of what Harman has built out here." "Marcus Harman," my husband said, shaking his hand easily. "And anything Harman has built, Claire built with me. She designed every operational system that makes this company actually function." There it was, said quietly, without performance. Daniel looked at me with an expression I had not anticipated. Not envy, not quite regret, but something more like the particular discomfort of a person who made a calculation long ago that is not resolving the way he expected. Rachel said something about the venue being beautiful. I agreed that it was. I told them I hoped they would enjoy the day and excused myself to finalize things with the AV team. The keynote went well. It went better than well. I talked about building operational systems for companies in growth phase chaos, about the specific discipline of scaling without losing the thing that made you worth scaling in the first place. I talked about what I had learned, failing and rebuilding and trusting a process even when the results were slow. The room was attentive in the way that a room is attentive when it recognizes that someone speaking knows exactly what they are talking about. I did not look for my father or my sister in the audience while I was speaking. I looked at the work. I was completely, entirely myself. Afterward, during the lunch break, my father found me. He waited until Marcus had been pulled away by a client, then appeared at my elbow with a glass of water and the careful expression of a man who had been rehearsing something. "You were exceptional up there," he said. "I always knew you had it in you." I looked at him for a moment. "Did you?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I want you to know that I'm proud of Dad." I said it gently, not harshly. "I don't need that right now." He blinked. "I spent a long time needing it," I said. "And I built everything you saw today in the years after I stopped waiting for it. So I'm glad you're proud. I genuinely am. But that's not what today is about for me." He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. It took me a moment to identify it. He was trying to figure out who he was talking to, because the person standing in front of him did not match the story he had been telling himself about me. Small, quiet, manageable. "Your sister," he began, shifting. "She and Daniel are having a difficult stretch. If there's anything you might be able to, their business situation will need to speak for itself," I said, the same way I would say it to anyone in a professional context. "We evaluate every potential client relationship on the same criteria. I'm sure you understand." He didn't press. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are processing something they did not prepare for. Rachel found me just before the afternoon sessions resumed. She came alone, without Daniel, and she stopped a few feet away with an uncertainty that looked foreign on her. My sister had always moved through rooms like she owned them. This version of her was someone different. "The keynote was incredible," she said. "Thank you." A silence settled between us. She filled it. "I don't expect anything from you, Claire. I just wanted you to know what happened, what I was part of. I've had a long time to think about it." I studied her face. She meant it. I could see that she did. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "Is that all?" she asked. Not accusatory, just honest. "What else would you like me to say?" She shook her head slightly. "I guess I thought you'd be angrier." "I was angry," I told her. "For a while. And then I got busy building something and the anger just ran out of space." I paused. "I don't hate you, Rachel. I don't hate either of you. I don't hate either of you, but I also can't give you something I don't have anymore, which is a version of me who needs this to be resolved." She nodded. Her eyes were bright in a way she was controlling carefully. "You seem really happy." "I am," I said. And I meant it in the most specific, unperformative way possible, not in contrast to anything she had or didn't have, just as a plain fact about my own life. Marcus reappeared at my side then, coffee in one hand, his jacket slightly rumpled from an hour of post-Keynote handshakes. He looked between me and my sister once, quickly, and then settled his hand at the small of my back the way he always did, without thinking, like it was the most natural place in the world for it to be. "Ready for the afternoon panel?" he asked. "Ready," I said. We drove home that evening through Denver's downtown as the sun dropped behind the mountains and the city lit up below us. Marcus was talking about a comment one of the afternoon panelists had made, something he disagreed with about forecasting methodology, and I was half listening and half watching the way the light changed on the buildings. "You were quiet for the drive," he said when we got home. He set down his bag and looked at me with the particular attention he gave, things he wanted to understand. "How are you actually doing?" I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned to think about things with him. "I feel like I set something down," I said. I didn't realize I was still carrying it. But seeing them, and then just going up there and doing the work, it's like something finished. "Good finished or just finished?" "Just finished, just finished," I said. "The way a chapter ends. No drama. It's just done." He pulled me into him and I stood there in our kitchen, in the house we had bought together in the 3rd year of our marriage, with the hum of the city outside and the quiet that was specifically ours. And I thought about the version of myself standing in that dim hallway in Portland, pressing her hand flat against the wall, not breathing. She had not been small. She had not been manageable. She had simply not yet found the room that was the right size for her. I had spent the years since building it.